Thank you, and thank you for this bookstore. And I appreciate everybody coming here tonight. And it's just so, this is such a great institution and such a great thing for this city and this country. And I am honored to be here. And I just really appreciate it. And I want to ask you first to be patient with me. This is actually only the second time I've talked about this book. It just came out last week. So this might be a little rough tonight, but hopefully we'll get through this well together. There are also many of my good friends here, so that makes me extra nervous. And can you hear me? Yeah. Should it come up? How about this? No? No? I can, oh, there we go. All right. Okay. I won't repeat anything I said because there really wasn't any point to it all. I do feel, it is awkward with the terrible events that happened in Boston, and my heart goes out to all the victims up there. It was sort of a shocking thing. One of the people that's here tonight is my brother, Eric. We actually grew up or spent part of our youth outside of Boston in a town called Wellesley. Where is my brother? Did he leave? There he is. Eric, I went to junior high there. Eric went through high school in Wellesley and then later on became a police officer in Wellesley, Massachusetts. He had friends that were sent down into Boston to help out with the security down there. He now lives in Northern Virginia and helps manage a helicopter ambulance service. It's still a form of public service, but I thank him, and I think all the people in law enforcement did an absolutely incredible job up in Boston this last week, and I just appreciate them for everything they do. There are a couple other friends I want to recognize tonight for a different type of service, for their journalistic service. One is Missy Ryan, who's right here in front. She's a colleague from Reuters. For the last decade, she covered the conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Libya. Incredible bravery she showed in all those countries, and an incredible, journalism. Warren Strobel, who's an editor at Reuters, was one of the team that were the only people that got the weapons of mass destruction story right before the U.S. invasion in 2003. He was then working at McClatchy newspapers with Jonathan Landay, and they kept warning everyone that there was no proof of WMD, and unfortunately, larger outlets didn't pick it up. And lastly is a friend of mine, Kathleen Reen, who's been working since she and I met in Bosnia 20 years ago, training local journalists around the world and doing an incredible job of creating local media that hold leaders accountable and hopefully counter some of the corruption and other issues that haunt these countries that I'm going to talk about in just a bit. In terms of the book, I first want to scale back your expectations. It's sort of a cheap maneuver, I know, but I'm not going to offer any magic solution tonight for ending terrorism in our country. I don't have any silver bullet that will suddenly stabilize the Middle East. My goal tonight and in writing this book was to sort of try to think about these challenges we face and think about this region in a different way. And I hope to provoke discussion. I'll, again, try to keep this short, and I'm sort of very eager to take your questions. This should be a conversation, and I want to hear what you think, criticize what I have to say, and I want you to sort of drive this thing. The general view of the Middle East is as this center of chaos, particularly since the Arab Spring. You simply see news reports of endless street battles in Egypt. Syria is just a bloodbath, and I agree. It's an area of tumult, and it's sad what's happened there. None of us know really what to make of the Arab Spring. Is this a positive thing or a negative thing? And I guess if there's one sort of simple message or sort of vision I want to give you tonight, is the way I look at the region. And again, you can question me once we get to that part of the conversation. Is that it is chaos, but I think there's a larger dynamic going on, and I think there's a historic struggle going on right now across the Middle East between sort of hardline Islamists, some of them are violent, as we know, and more moderate Muslims who I think are more secular, and they, and I am not, an expert in Islam by any stretch, but in conversations with these moderate forces and moderate individuals, they talk about how they're very proud of being Muslims, and they want to be both Muslim, but they also want to be modern, and they don't see those two as in conflict at all. And I want to talk about that group tonight. And the focus of my book is, what was our track record on helping more moderate Muslims, and looking forward, is there more we can do in the Arab Spring to back those groups and back those people who they really don't want to be dictated to by American soldiers at gunpoint and sort of forced to carry out some American-style, democracy, but they also don't want to be ruled by jihadists who are forcing them at gunpoint to sort of live in this strange sort of 12th century caliphate. And this, again, might be somewhat simplistic, but I'm just going to sort of read a couple passages from the book or cite a couple examples that I think represent these two groups. I have a bias because of my experiences, the kidnapping that was mentioned. And one group, the negative group that I see on the side of this and a group that I'm biased against, would have been, my guards when I was kidnapped. During the 7 months I was in captivity, I got to know these guys fairly well. They rotated during the 7 months, but they all had, several things in common. Again, this would be the sort of more conservative, more radical side in the Middle East that by no means represents the majority, but it's the one that you see and hear about on the news the most. So when I was in captivity, most of my guards were Afghan men. They were in their late 20s or early 30s. All had very limited educations from government or religious schools. Many had gone to madrasas. Some didn't make it past high school, and none of them had seen the world beyond Afghanistan and Pakistan. There was one guard in particular who I lived with for 6 weeks, and he was preparing to be a suicide bomber. And I had many conversations with him about why he was preparing for this mission. He was a young man in his 20s, sort of slim with brown hair and brown eyes, and he said he had studied engineering in high school. But years later, he was in the tribal areas of Pakistan, assigned to guard me and preparing for his suicide bombing. He was, frankly, better educated than many of the other guards. There were other guards that could barely read, but he had gone to high school and planned to go to college at one point. And I finally asked him after a few days with him, why did he want to die? Why did he want to be a suicide bomber? And he answered to me that living in this world was a burden for any true Muslim, and that his real goal in life was to die and go to heaven. He said earthly relationships with his parents and his siblings didn't matter to him. And what was interesting is he was so well educated that we were able to speak in English, and he was sort of puzzled by me, and he was puzzled by the West, and he, like many of my other guards, was absolutely convinced that the 9/11 attacks were staged and that there was a worldwide conspiracy by Christians and Hindus and Jews to obliterate Islam from the face of the earth. And they absolutely believed it. They absolutely watched these videos that kept showing evidence of this. And I think, and we can talk about it, I think this is potentially, we don't know what happened in Boston, but potentially this world that these young men were lured into. But they really felt sort of helpless, that there was this worldwide conspiracy. They had no way to stop it, and they were defending their faith and their culture and their way of life from this foreign assault. And he asked me questions during the time we spent together, and one of his questions was he wanted to know if it was true that a necktie like the one I'm wearing tonight was a secret symbol of Christianity. He believed that, as he saw Afghans on local TV stations, government officials dressed in Western clothes, that they were being forced to dress that way, and this was some sign that they were part of this Christian conspiracy. He'd also believed that we Westerners were very weak, and we only cared about the pleasures of this world. I said that I miss my family, and he seemed sort of amused by it. Again, he had been brainwashed systematically to not miss his family, that his relationship with his family did not matter. That's a clear kind of process, and it takes a long time to brainwash these kids into becoming suicide bombers. But a key thing was severing his ties to his family. And I was treated well throughout my captivity, and one of the most remarkable things about him was that I was brought newspapers to read by my guards. They treated me fairly well, and they brought me English language Pakistani newspapers. And this is, again, the sort of more moderate side of Pakistan. These newspapers would have ads on them for mobile phone companies in Pakistan, shampoo, and the ads would actually show pictures of Pakistani women with no scarves on their heads, and it would show their hair. And after I would read the papers and get rid of them, this suicide bomber in training would go burn them, because he felt that having these images sort of in the living area where we were was a sin, and that if he didn't act quickly enough to burn them and get them out of our house, he himself was going to go to hell. So that's the sort of level of, frankly, despair and fear that these young guys feel, that if they don't, pray properly, if they aren't humble enough to